The morning sun stretched across the quiet suburban neighborhood of Silver Pines, painting the neatly trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes in warm gold. Birds perched on manicured hedges, chirping above the hum of distant sprinklers. It was the kind of place where everything looked picture-perfect, too perfect. And right at the end of the cul-de-sac stood Keanu Reeves' modest home, the only one that didn't look copied and pasted from a builder's brochure. His yard wasn't sterile or symmetrical. Wildflowers grew by the walkway, and the paint on his porch was slightly faded. But what caught the most attention that week wasn't his porch or flowers. It was the fence. Keanu had spent 3 days building it by hand. No fancy contractors, no modern panels, just reclaimed cedar planks and his own 2 hands. Each board carried the marks of time, knots, and scratches that told a story. To him, it wasn't just a fence, it was protection, privacy, and a quiet statement about resilience. He worked quietly, his sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair, and a calm focus in his eyes. But to his neighbors, the sight was jarring. By midweek, whispers began rippling through the perfectly pruned hedges. "That fence looks like something out of a junkyard," one resident muttered. "It's lowering property values," another added. By Friday, someone had already filed a formal complaint to the Homeowners Association. When the HOA president, Martha Linden, showed up that evening, she came armed with a clipboard and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Reeves," she began, adjusting her pearls as she examined the fence like it was a crime scene, "this structure violates Section 8, subsection C of our neighborhood aesthetic guidelines." Keanu looked up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's just wood, Martha. I'm keeping it low, natural. Shouldn't bother anyone." She chuckled condescendingly. "Natural isn't the issue. It's unsightly. We have standards to maintain." Her tone was firm but rehearsed, like she'd given the speech 100 times before. Keanu paused, gazing at the fence he'd built with quiet pride. "Sometimes things that look rough can be stronger than they seem," he said softly. Martha blinked, not quite understanding, or perhaps choosing not to. "You'll need to remove it within 7 days, Mr. Reeves. The board will be in touch." That night, the soft hum of crickets filled the air as porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. Keanu sat on his steps, a mug of black coffee in hand, watching the moonlight trace over his newly built fence. He could hear the faint murmurs of neighbors through open windows, their voices carrying the same judgmental tone he'd grown used to over the years. But there was something they didn't know. That fence wasn't random. It stood exactly where the old drainage ditch began, a dip in the landscape that flooded every winter. He remembered how the runoff used to pour down the slope, flooding the yards of nearby homes. This fence wasn't just decoration, it was built to redirect the water flow, reinforced quietly to handle what he suspected was coming soon. As the night deepened, a cool breeze rolled in from the west, carrying the faint scent of rain. Keanu took one last sip of his coffee, eyes narrowing toward the horizon where distant thunder flickered like a silent warning. "Ugly," he muttered to himself, glancing at the fence with a faint smirk. "We'll see about that." Then he stood, the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel as he disappeared inside, unaware that this simple hand-built fence, mocked by the HOA, would soon become the town's quiet savior. Morning sunlight poured over Silver Pines like a layer of gold leaf, soft and serene, but beneath that calm glow, tension simmered. The HOA office had wasted no time. Within 48 hours of Martha's visit, the neighborhood bulletin board outside the clubhouse displayed a freshly printed notice. Violation number 247, unauthorized fence construction. Property 118, Maple Grove, Reeves. The document fluttered in the wind, pinned neatly beside a flyer for the upcoming Spring Garden Aesthetic Competition. Neighbors stopped, read, and whispered. A few snapped photos on their phones. Some smirked, some frowned, and some, secretly, felt a pang of guilt for saying nothing. Meanwhile, Keanu went about his days the same way he always did, quietly, deliberately. He walked his dog, watered his flowers, and worked on his motorcycle in the garage, never once mentioning the notice or the growing murmurs around him. He'd spent years in the spotlight, learning the art of staying calm when others stirred chaos. Still, the HOA didn't share his patience. On Wednesday morning, a white envelope appeared taped to his front door, a $500 fine for non-compliance with aesthetic standards. The letter warned that continued defiance could result in legal action and community penalty escalation. Keanu read it once, twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on his kitchen counter. He didn't argue. He didn't post online. He simply walked out to the fence, ran his fingers along the rough cedar surface, and began reinforcing the beams with new bolts. By the weekend, the HOA had escalated their efforts. Martha and 2 other board members held a special meeting outside Keanu's house, right on his front lawn. "We tried diplomacy," Martha said to the small crowd that had gathered, "but he's ignoring community standards. This fence sets a bad precedent." The murmurs grew louder. Cameras clicked. But amidst the disapproval, a small voice piped up from the back, a little boy from 2 houses down. "My dad said Mr. Reeves built the fence so the water won't flood again." The crowd turned. Martha's face tightened. "That's irrelevant, sweetie. This is about neighborhood harmony." But the boy's mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering for him to stay quiet. Keanu, who had been standing quietly on his porch, finally stepped forward. His voice was calm, low, and steady. "Harmony isn't everyone looking the same," he said. "It's everyone being safe together." The crowd fell silent for a moment, the words hanging heavy in the air. Martha crossed her arms, visibly annoyed but slightly shaken. "Safety doesn't excuse violation, Mr. Reeves. You can't just build whatever you want." Keanu nodded. "Maybe not," he said. "But I built what I needed to protect the land. You'll understand soon." He turned and walked back toward the fence, his figure framed by the golden afternoon light, while Martha scribbled furiously on her clipboard. To the HOA, it was defiance. To Keanu, it was preparation. That night, the wind began to howl again, stronger than before. A chill swept through Silver Pines, rattling the windows and bending the treetops. Keanu stood at his window, watching the cedar planks stand firm against the gusts. The news forecast flickered on the muted television. Asterisk, severe storm alert, unusual rainfall expected across the county. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating his face for a brief moment. Calm, collected, resolute. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping gently on the fence that had already caused so much noise. What the HOA didn't know was that the real test was just beginning, and the line between pride and purpose was about to wash away in the coming storm. By morning, Silver Pines no longer looked like the pristine postcard neighborhood it used to be. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the rooftops with a heavy, silent weight. The trees swayed uneasily as if whispering warnings through their leaves. Local weather alerts pinged every few hours, each one more urgent than the last. Category 2 storm approaching. Expected landfall within 24 hours. The HOA group chat buzzed with frantic messages, talk of sandbags, insurance checks, and whether to cancel the upcoming community barbecue. But amid the panic, one house at the end of the street remained unervingly calm. Keanu's lights flicked on early that morning, and by noon, he was already out in the rain, tightening the last support beams on his so-called ugly fence. From her window across the street, Martha Linden sipped her coffee nervously, watching him through the blur of rain. "That man is impossible," she muttered to herself, yet there was something in his movements, steady, purposeful, almost peaceful, that she couldn't quite ignore. Every few minutes, a gust of wind would whip across the yard, bending branches and flinging leaves. Keanu barely flinched. He worked like someone who had seen storms before. As he fastened a final bracket, a neighbor jogged up in a raincoat, Elliot, a middle-aged father of 2. "Hey man," he called out through the wind. "You really think that fence is gonna do anything? HOA says it's unsafe." Keanu glanced at the darkening sky. "It's not about safe," he replied. "It's about ready." As the hours passed, the storm grew restless. Rain began hammering harder, bouncing off car hoods and sidewalks. The once perfect lawns of Silver Pines started turning into puddles. Gutter drains overflowed, sending sheets of water trickling toward the very ditch where Keanu's fence now stood. The old drainage system hadn't been updated in years, a fact Keanu remembered from when he'd helped a neighbor shovel mud out of his flooded basement the year before. He'd studied the slope, the way the water traveled, the weak spots where erosion started. That's why he built the fence, not for looks, not for privacy, but to redirect the flow and slow the flood. By late afternoon, the HOA emergency meeting was held over video call. Martha sat before her laptop, her pearl necklace slightly askew, as board members discussed evacuations and liability issues. "We should have had the council check the sewers," one muttered. "We can't let it flood like last year." Another sighed. "At least Reeves' fence won't be standing after this. It's a miracle it hasn't already fallen." Martha hesitated before responding, her eyes darting toward the rain outside her window. "We'll see," she said quietly. "We'll see soon enough." Night fell with a roar. The storm hit full force. Thunder cracked like cannon fire. The trees bent nearly sideways as the wind screamed through silver pines. Power flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the street into darkness. Keanu stood in his yard, flashlight in hand, his jacket soaked through but his stance unshaken. He checked the fence again, each plank, each bolt, every post holding strong. The water began rising along the ditch, rushing toward his property and diverting where the fence guided it away. Inside his house, his dog barked nervously, but Keanu whispered softly, "It's okay, boy. It's holding." Meanwhile, across the street, water began to pool along Martha's lawn, rushing down from a higher end of the cul-de-sac. She watched, horrified, as it slammed against the curbs, threatening to burst over the flower beds she'd so carefully trimmed. And then she saw it. The current hit Keanu's fence, split in two, and redirected harmlessly down the side path toward the street drain. Her breath caught. The same fence she'd mocked all month was now the only thing keeping half the neighborhood from flooding. Lightning flashed again, illuminating Keanu standing firm in the rain, like a silhouette against nature's fury. The storm was far from over, but one truth was already clear. Silver Pine's survival would depend on the man they'd ridiculed and the fence they wanted torn down. The sky split open with a sound like tearing metal. Rain poured in sheets so thick the streetlights blurred into smears of gold. Silver Pines, once the image of suburban perfection, was now a battlefield of wind, water, and panic. Branches snapped. Power lines sparked. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, drowned out by the deafening roar of the storm. The neighborhood that prided itself on order was now swallowed by chaos, and at the heart of it all stood Keanu Reeves, drenched and determined, refusing to retreat inside. Water surged down the hill, gushing toward the cul-de-sac in a violent torrent. The old drainage ditch overflowed instantly, just as Keanu had predicted months ago. The flow slammed into his wooden fence with bone-rattling force, but instead of collapsing, it flexed and held. The reinforced posts groaned but stood firm, diverting the surge away from the row of houses that would have been the first to flood. Keanu's flashlight beam flickered over the fence, the light cutting through the sheets of rain as he checked for weak spots. "Hold on," he muttered under his breath, hammering an extra brace into a joint even as water lashed at his boots. Across the street, Martha Linden watched from her window, her face pale and frozen. Her prized garden had vanished beneath 6 inches of water, and the storm was still rising. The power was gone, and the roads were impassable. When a deafening crash echoed through the neighborhood, she flinched. It was the sound of a massive oak tree uprooting 2 houses down, crushing a parked SUV beneath it. Martha grabbed her phone, her hands trembling, only to see the signal flicker to "no service." She looked back out, just in time to see a chunk of her neighbor's fence get ripped away and hurled down the street like a splintered spear. Panic clawed at her chest, until she saw a figure wading through the floodwater, heading straight toward her property. "Mr. Reeves," she shouted over the storm as Keanu slogged through the rising current, flashlight cutting through the chaos. "What are you doing? Get inside." "I told you this area floods first," he called back, his voice steady but strained. "You need to get to higher ground." "I can't. I'm trapped," she cried, pointing toward her front door, where water was already seeping in. Without hesitation, Keanu trudged forward, pushing through knee-high water to reach her porch. He slammed his shoulder against the swollen door until it burst open, sending a wave of water across the tiles. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. Martha hesitated only for a second before gripping it tightly. He led her out, shielding her from flying debris with his own body as they fought their way toward the slope near his house, where the ground was higher and the fence had turned the current aside like a guardian wall. They stumbled into Keanu's yard, gasping for breath as the storm howled around them. Behind them, the lower half of the cul-de-sac had become a river, swirling with branches and trash cans. Martha turned to look at the fence she'd tried so hard to have removed. Under the strobing lightning, it looked almost alive, sturdy, scarred, unyielding. The planks strained but never gave in, deflecting the water like a fortress built by hand and conviction. For the first time, she understood. It wasn't ugly, it was armor. Keanu guided her inside, lighting a few candles as the storm raged outside. His dog whimpered softly, curling up by the door. "You okay?" he asked, handing Martha a dry towel. She nodded shakily, her usual composure replaced by raw disbelief. I didn't know," she said quietly. "You tried to warn us." Keanu simply shrugged, his voice calm as ever. "You don't always have to say everything," he replied. "Sometimes you just build what needs building." The two of them stood in silence, listening to the thunder roll and the fence creak under the weight of the wind. But it held. Through every blast, every surge of water, every violent gust, it held. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, two neighbors waited in the flickering candlelight, realizing that everything they thought they understood about strength, beauty, and purpose had just been rewritten by a man with a hammer and a vision. Morning broke with an eerie stillness. The storm had passed, leaving Silver Pines unrecognizable beneath a shroud of fog and silence. The perfect lawns were gone, replaced by pools of muddy water. Street signs leaned at odd angles, and the air smelled of wet wood, earth, and electricity. For a long moment, no one spoke. No cars, no leaf blowers, no chatter. Only the sound of dripping water filled the air. Then, slowly, doors creaked open up and down the street. Neighbors emerged, dazed, clutching blankets and flashlights, stepping into a world that looked like it had survived a war. Martha stood on Keanu's porch, wrapped in one of his flannel blankets, her eyes scanning the aftermath. Across the cul-de-sac, she could see the damage. Fences torn away, mailboxes scattered, a few homes with shattered windows. But her own house, though drenched and battered, still stood solid. And the reason was right in front of her. The fence. That same ugly, unsightly wall of cedar now leaned slightly, bruised but unbroken. It had stopped the floodwaters from sweeping down into the lower street, creating a barrier that had saved at least 4 homes. The irony struck her like lightning. What they condemned had just protected them all. By mid-morning, the neighborhood gathered in the street, shivering as they assessed the damage. Keanu was already outside, sleeves rolled up, hauling debris into neat piles. He worked quietly, without fanfare, stopping only to help an elderly couple clear their driveway. When a small group of residents approached him, Martha among them, he simply nodded in greeting, as though nothing unusual had happened. "Mr. Reeves," one man said hesitantly, we owe you an apology." Others murmured in agreement. Even Martha couldn't meet his eyes at first. "Your fence," she began softly, "it saved us." Her voice broke on the last word. Keanu smiled faintly, his face weathered but kind. "Guess it wasn't as ugly as they said," he replied. A few people chuckled, but there was no mockery in it, only gratitude. Martha stepped closer, her usual poise replaced by humility. "We were wrong," she admitted. "All of us. We were so focused on how things looked that we forgot what really matters." She looked around at the neighborhood, muddy, scarred, but still standing, and sighed. "Maybe we need fewer rules, and more fences like yours." Keanu looked at the sky, where the clouds were slowly parting to reveal a faint streak of sunlight. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but the good kind, the ones that keep people safe, not apart." By afternoon, the community had rallied together, following Keanu's lead. They patched roofs, cleared drains, and shared food from gas stoves and coolers. Martha brought hot coffee to the volunteers, personally handing a cup to Keanu. "For the record," she said with a small smile, "I'm officially retracting the violation notice." Keanu accepted the cup, the corners of his mouth curving upward. "Appreciate that," he said simply. "But keep the rules. Just make sure they serve people, not appearances." Martha nodded, eyes glistening. "You have my word." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the residents of Silver Pines gathered around a small bonfire on the street. Children laughed, neighbors shared stories, and for the first time in years, the community felt united, not by perfect lawns or spotless fences, but by gratitude. Keanu sat quietly at the edge of the crowd, his dog resting beside him, watching the flames dance in the soft breeze. The fence stood silhouetted in the distance, its rough edges glowing amber in the firelight, scarred, strong, and beautiful in its own way. Martha walked over and stood beside him. "You know," she said softly, "I think your fence might be the most beautiful thing in this whole neighborhood." Keanu smiled, eyes on the horizon. "It's not about the fence," he said. "It's about what you build it for." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of the storm. And in that quiet moment, Silver Pines, once a neighborhood obsessed with perfection, finally understood that sometimes the things that don't fit the mold are the ones that hold everything together.